I will joke that or not joke, but I will refer to Let the Truth Speak as, while we were making it, I would refer to it as A Dream in Static's moodier little sister, and it's fitting that we ended up with a woman on the cover. I think A Dream in Static maybe looks a little androgynous, maybe more masculine.
I mean, if it's a little sister, it's a sister that quickly became much taller and.
Well, it's the younger sister. It's 8 years.
Yeah,
younger.
TRT in the vein.
She was a 12-pound, 5-ounce baby.
Very healthy baby. Took a long time to. What's the opposite of premature when the baby's
post-mature?
Post-mature. Yeah. So
very post.
I would describe the album it's a very post-mature offering.
Yeah.
It's not even just mature, it's beyond that.
I think something with Let the Truth Speak that's also notable is, I think part of what made it take so long was it was a record in which all the things that were just kind of not exactly how we wanted them in A Dream in Static. Like, A Dream in Static was a well-received album. I think people responded well to it, and it meant a lot to certain people who it affected and impacted. I think for us, there were certain things in the making of A Dream in Static that we kind of held on to as like, it wasn't exactly how we wanted that, or that's not how we wanted the drums to sound, or that wasn't the guitar sound here we wanted. Mm-hmm. And so I think when we set out to do this record, there were a handful of things that I don't think we had them as like an overt checklist, but I think at every sort of decision point we had on this record, if there was something that wasn't quite how we wanted it, we weren't going to let that happen again. We were going to just, if it took months to achieve the sound we wanted on something, especially once we got a few years into it, I think it was the case that it's like, well,
we really hit our stride.
It's already taken this long, so at this point we really might as well just get it how we want it.
It's kind of like as you learn more, like you know less in a way, and the more you know, the more of an infinite rabbit hole you can go down to. So it's like, okay, we got to this level with A Dream in Static, we learned all these things. Okay, now we can go beyond that. We knew that A Dream in Static was a huge project. So what would this be if we're trying to do that, but then add on to it?
And then have the sense that we can do it ourselves. It's like, that was such an easy album to make. It came out pretty darn well, ultimately. And we worked with some great people that we learned a lot from.
Yeah.
We can do this, we got this. It was a little different from that.
Yeah, I think with Let the Truth Speak, we bit off more than we could chew and realized it very quickly. I think we were probably at like 10% complete, like a 10% progress bar, and already we're like, all right, well, we're already tapped out on this. Like, very rare from then on was it the case that every one of us had sort of a full life bar as far as the energy and focus we could give to the record. So I think there were various points where maybe one of us would have to just sort of pick it up while the others sort of just recovered from whatever, whether it was just an existential feeling of, holy crap, there's no way we're going to do this, or give up now, or just exhaustion from putting whatever they had into it.
Yeah, and I think, Frank, you've said this before, that it's almost kind of like the ambition scope of like making a full-length movie, but with like 4 to 6 people max at a given moment tending to it, and otherwise just pretty much like, you want this to happen, it's all on your shoulders, go do it yourself. The burden and the psychological and emotional drain, and even just the way that impacts your day-to-day life is and was very substantial.
Sort of, we as a band were sort of the executive producer as far as we produced the album as a whole in a way that no one did. For Let the Truth Speak, we basically, for each segment of it or each instrument of it, it's like, who gets like the absolute best drum sound in the world that we want, that we can possibly get? Let's go with that person for this drum, for like recording the drums. Mm-hmm. So yeah, just at every layer of the album pretty much, we were sort of the global producer, but there was also sort of an individual expert we brought in that we felt like was the person who we either most trusted from an expertise standpoint, or had the sensibilities that we most sort of felt aligned with in that particular department to get the sound we wanted for that layer.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put that. I think the record as a whole has at every level, a very distinct sound. I think there are things about it that remind me of certain albums that I really like the sounds of and very distinct in different ways. But there's not one exactly that it feels stamped out of the mold from, which I think is really cool. But one of the challenging things I think from that approach of like, well, we want this thing to be this way with this person and this thing with this person, is that it never felt at any given moment. Maybe Greg Thomas was the closest to this for the amount that we worked with him, but it never felt like there was the same kind of overseer of the project that there was for the first record.
Each song on this album was basically like its own album production. So part of the experience of making this record was almost making many records. You have a song like All We Knew and Never Loved, and then a song like The Lesser Evil, and then a song like Tyranny, and then a song like Denial's Aria, where do any of these line up from a production standpoint? So we basically couldn't streamline the process. And so that was part of the difficulty of making the record, and maybe what will make it rewarding for some people, which is to have this collection of these different productions and you're listening to a whole different soundscape of material throughout a whole record rather than having this similarly sounded thing. Part of the challenge and the ambition and even, just the songwriting and what we were feeling is like, everyone's like, okay, we want to express ourselves this way or that way, and that's how we kind of do things, and then we throw it all in the pot and be like, oh yeah, we can make an album out of this, totally.
I think another thing that probably added quite a bit to the load of this record was the doubling down on the cinematic, and the sense that the first record we were kind of cinematic in given spaces. Mob Mentality, Contemplation, Entering the Light, where we went for more of the orchestral sound, and outside of that there was more like this post-rocky meets kind of alternative and a little djenty in places. And this time around I think we wanted that to be a bit more cohesive and a bit more that it's not just a sprinkle of cinematic here or there, but every song gets its own cinematic sauce, and having those
Just
distinct
a sprinkle
elements.
of
cinematic. Yeah, a sprinkle of cinematic. I mean, I'm a big sauce person, so I gotta have my sauce on everything, drown out the flavor of the food. But yeah, I think that both made the songs in a certain way, even if the elements were very distinct from each other, whether it was strings or brass or like a funky horn section, there's still that level of textural arrangement depth to each song, but it's the process of getting that in the right place is very different, and a lot of work for each of these songs.
We as on the global whole have like this sort of unifying, I think, ethos, but I think the biggest thing that makes each song sort of its own unique snowflake, as it were, is that the sort of who's in the band of what sounds are in the DNA of this song. And I think, because emotionally I think they often feel in some ways kind of similar, as far as there's this existential weight to it, there's this pull, this gravitas.
And they feel like
to
a
it.
story too.
Right.
There's like a whole story throughout the song.
But the materials that you're using to tell that story I compare it sometimes to Black Mirror, where it's like each of these episodes kind of feels mood-wise fairly similar, but the characters are all different, the specific topic is different, but there's certainly an ominous and a concerning whole of where we're headed. And I think the topics of this album really, and the themes of this album, are about humanity and where they're headed. So I do feel like this album in a way is a musical version or a musical equivalent of something that the Black Mirror show is also kind of, hitting on.
The first thought that came into my head when I heard the final masters, listen all the way through, was I was basically like, either this is the most genius album, or people will be scratching their heads like, what did I just listen to? Like, I don't get it at all. And I think in a way, it actually ended up kind of being both to some people, depending on who you ask. And, you know, I guess you could mark that as an achievement or it's as a unique thing. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I do feel great about the end results.
I think it's naturally a polarizing record, especially because it's different from any record I'm aware of in sort of the progressive music space or otherwise. Yeah, I'm very proud of it. I feel very good about it, and I would never do it again, ever. We want like 8 years. I would give the album 5 out of 5 stars as far as how good it is to listen to. The experience of making it 1 out of 5 stars would not recommend. And so, I mean, I think repeating that sort of level of ambition with the level of sort of balance with the naivete of what it would take to achieve it, and how much sort of baggage we carried into it as far as what we were trying to achieve, or sort of almost like healing ourselves that we felt like we hadn't crossed off. I think that I would never want that again.
I think a thing that you've tried to impress upon Frank and me, people who are very all or nothing in how we see things, it's not as much about did you make as few mistakes as possible. It's more that did you make as many worthwhile and moving and memorable moments and experiences in the art that you created. And I am very confident that we have quite a few of those moments on this record. We got to put everything on the line. We have to not be afraid to take risks and make mistakes. We have to be as earnest as we can be as artists, but have some of that daring and that inner child that is like, ooh, that's cool, that's exciting, let me see where that goes. And just condense that into an experience and a record to the best of our ability, that hopefully both moves and in some cases maybe even inspires people. The catharsis and the emotion hold nothing back.